Hi, everybody. Are we ready? We're going to talk about animals. What? So we just talked about plants. Now we're going to talk about animals. These are the invertebrates. I bet you know. So Chloe's not included in that. Chloe is a vertebrate, right? So you can see the vertebrae, the backbone. We are going to first talk about animals that do not have them. So you and I are not included in that. And I'm super excited about this because they're awesome. So some of what I would consider, or biologists would consider, the most successful animals are invertebrates. Here we go. You need to have your lecture notes, and let's pull up the slides. Here we go, invertebrates. And so if you're interested in your skimming your book, remember your book is a little book. But if you're interested, there's the chapter link for you. If you're not excited yet, you can start talking about sponges. So there's a little sponge video, not SpongeBob, but a sponge video. And I think I just dated myself. But anyway, it's there if you want to watch it. And so when we're talking about animals, let's just get ourselves grounded in our phylogenetic tree of life, which is which domain are we in, which kingdom are we in, and then we're going to talk about the major phyla of animals, okay? So animals are their own kingdom, Animalia. And where are they? Which domain are they? Oh, I think we got a little star, didn't we? There's a star on there. Okay, so what is an animal? So you'll see in your notes, it says, what are the key features of animals? What are they? What's an animal? So go ahead. Do they have a cell wall? What do you think? Do animal cells have a cell wall? So write it down. Are they unicellular or multicellular? Oh, interesting. So animals are what? Multicellular. Are they prokaryotes or eukaryotes? Hopefully you saw that on the domain. Anyway, anything? Oh, are they heterotrophs or autotrophs? So that's a term from 101. So hetero meaning eating others, and autotrophs mean they make their own. So plants are autotrophs, algae are autotrophs. They make their own food. We are not autotrophs, are we? I wish I was green and I didn't have to eat. Just sit there in the sun. All right, so fill that in on the table in the lecture notes. What is an invertebrate? Here's a nice picture of some of the diversity of invertebrates. And they are diverse. And I'm excited about talking about them. And the classification system that we're going to use is, again, a phylogeny, a phylogenetic tree. It's a little, oh, I thought it was the next slide, but it's not. Let's just talk about animals for a second. I just wanted to bring this up. We'll probably talk about it in lecture, but I just wanted to bring up, how did animals flourish all of a sudden? What are some of the things that animals need to flourish and radiate and become diverse? And there are so many of us. Well, we need what plants make for us, which is oxygen. Oh, we also need sugar that they make for us, right? But we also need a lot of oxygen. And so one of the things that we can look at in the fossil record, which is kind of cool, is oxygen levels went way up because plants were going crazy. Plants went crazy. So oxygen levels went way up. And because of the oxygen levels going way up 300 million years ago or whatever, 325, and don't worry, you don't need to know the numbers, but because they went up, it made way for more complicated animals to come into existence. Isn't that cool? Because you need a lot of oxygen if you move around a lot. If you're something that moves, if you're an active animal and you move around, you're not a sponge, but you move around a lot, you're going to need a lot of oxygen. So very interesting just to tie those two together. I just wanted to bring that up. Back to the regular programming. This is the phylogeny. It's not easy to use. As a challenge to you, I would like you to make a phylogeny with one line. Maybe I'll do it too. We should do it in class. It'd be fun, or do it in student hours, officers. But make it with one line like we had with the plants. This is the only one I could find that was open resourced, right? Like that isn't copyrighted. But one line, and have each trait coming off the line, right? So it would be multicellularity would be a dot, and then you'd have periphera, okay? And then the next dot, the next trait would be about symmetry, and you'd have cnidaria. That's the CNIDAR. Those are jellyfish, okay, and hydra. And then the next one would be flatworms. That phylum is called Platyhelminthes. So we're looking at phyla here, right? Then the next one coming off would be the nematodes. Does that make sense? And it would be talking about body cavities. So what I was thinking is it would be great to redo this on your own if you want. And I think I would like to redo it so that it's one line with the traits coming off. Just much easier to read than like with the plants, okay? So, but we're going to be using this because look at these different phyla. In fact, I'm just going to say them out loud because as a visual learner, I'm looking at all these words and I'm like, I don't know what those are. Okay, so Periphera or sponges, that's a phylum. Phylum Cnidaria is jellyfish and hydra. Flatworms, that's actually it. Their phyla or their phylum name is Platyhelminthes. So I always like to think platies are flatties for flatworms. Nice. Rotifera we don't really talk about, but nematodes are also worms. Okay, so nematoda are worms. Mollusca are things like clams and snails and octopi and squid. We're going to see how smart they are. Octopus, the plural for octopus actually is octopus, but I like to say octopi. Annelida, annelids are also worms, but segmented worms, surprisingly complex. Next are arthropods, probably the most successful phylum on the planet, arthropods. Spiders, I don't like them either. No, they're fine. They're just kind of scary. Spiders, lobsters, insects, bees, wasps, butterflies, all of them, arthropod, very successful group. Next, we go down to the echinoderms. Those are starfish and sea stars. And we won't talk about the chordates today because you and I are part of the chordates. So we'll have a whole week on chordates, those that mostly have a spinal cord, but are a group that we group together, a different phylum. We will talk about those later. So these are the main phyla of animals. Okay, so we'll talk about invertebrates today. And this is, I just put this in here because the history in brief is so interesting. The bottom is the old, and the top is the new. And it's just fun to look at. You can see like where did flowering plants come into play? Where did animals come into play? So it has seedless vascular plants in the Carboniferous. So these are millions of years before now. Pretty interesting. And I have a video for you to watch. Maybe I will put it in. Yes, we will probably watch it together. It's because it's so good, but it's the brief history of time. And it's about 10 minutes long. It's so great. And it sort of just summarizes this in a pictorial format. Okay, so one of the things we're going to talk about is we're looking back at that tree. And one of the things that we need to talk about are with animals. Okay, the first thing we need to talk about is like, oh, do they have tissues? That's what we're going to talk about first, and then we'll talk about symmetry. Do they have tissues? So tissue layers, and I'm not going to go into the names of the layers and the germ layers, stuff like that. But tissues are organized cells, okay? So cells that are organized. Like you have muscle tissue and you have nervous tissue in your body, okay? We're not gonna name them all, but we're gonna say some animals have no tissues at all. They just have a bunch of cells, okay? And then other animals, and it's one of those things where it's the trait and everything after that. So other animals have tissues. And so the first group of animals called sponges or Periphera, that's the phylum, they do not have tissues. So on your trait tree, on your phylogenetic tree, you could draw it yourself or you can look back here and I'll show you. But Periphera do not have, that's the very first one, let me annotate here, very first one, they do not have tissues. So that's your trait. Your trait is tissues, right? Tissues or no tissues. And Periphera do not have them. Everybody else has them. So this is sort of complexity going through the phylogenies. We're not going to really talk about why you should have tissues or not, like what's the advantage of tissues. We did that a lot with plants, like what's the advantage of having seeds? But we're just looking at complexity versus non-complexity. The plants do not, or sorry, the sponges do not need to have complexity. It's fine. They don't. Good. But everybody else did. Okay, make sense? So let's go back to where we were. Now, the next trait that we want to talk about, with our phylogeny or our complexity or timeline or evolution or adaptations is symmetry. Now, symmetry is how, if I can slice it up, how would it slice? So radial symmetry is like a circle or a sphere. And when you slice it, it looks like a pizza. Like each slice is kind of the same. So think of like an octopus. That's radial symmetry versus bilateral symmetry. Think about yourself. You can stand up or look at Chloe. If you slice it in half, there's a right and a left. But if you slice the nose from the rest, they're not equal. They don't look alike. So bilateral symmetry is there's one way to slice it, which is right and left half, and they should roughly be the same. Okay. So, and then there's no symmetry at all in animals where the thing is just asymmetrical. And that the only type of animals that are asymmetrical are sponges. So animals are either no symmetry, radial symmetry, or bilateral. And it turns out bilateral symmetry was very important, very, very important for the evolution of life and life as we know it. So I have a little dorky video that we're going to watch together. One thing, I'm going to share sound to make sure that you can hear it. Very dorky video we'll be watching together that I made a little while ago. Let's see if I can get out of this right here. Sorry about that. Big brains. Okay, here we go. How do you feel today? Do you feel a little bit like this picture? Is your brain like, whoa? Guess what we're talking about? Whoa! Animals, do they have brains? Who's got them? Why do they have them? What's the evolutionary adaptation or adaptations that they would need to have big brains? Let's do this. Okay, so Periphera. Let's just talk about the simplest animals. Periphera, sponges. Do they have them? So I want you to write it down. Do they have them? Do they have brains? What do you think? Little filter feeders? They're just catching whatever's coming by, catching the nutrients that are coming by. They're in the ocean, not moving. So that's sessile. Do they need them? Do they need a brain? Write it down. Write it down. Okay, I want you to also write down that concept we talked about, which is symmetry. So what's their shape? Do they have a symmetry? Are they bilateral? Are they radial? Do they not have any symmetry at all? That means that they're not circular and they're not oblong, okay? They just have a funny shape. What's their symmetry? Write it down. Okay, let's look at platies. Platies or flaties? So flat, worms, platyhelminthes, flaties. Do they have a brain? Check out their shape. What's their shape? Are they round? Okay. What's their symmetry? Are they bilateral? That's the long shape. You don't have to worry about the spelling. Just get the idea. Do they have a brain? Would they need a brain? Do they move? Start thinking about, like, what does it mean to have a brain? Like, why even have a brain? What good is a brain? It gives us all this anxiety. What good is a brain? Start to think about that. Awesome. So if we go back, one of these two shapes is going to rock the world, my friends. If we go back, so from an evolutionary perspective, look at these two shapes. Now we're looking at symmetry. We're looking at symmetry. So look at the radial symmetry, that's the circular one, and then look at the bilateral symmetry. They have the same, basically it's the same structure. One of them's long, bilateral, one of them's round. Who do you think might create a brain and why? Stop. Think about it.
Why might you have a brain for one of these shapes? And what we're going to see, we're going to use a term called cephalization. Don't worry about it. It's in your notes. But something magical is going to happen just based on the shape, which is super simple, right? Okay, what we're going to do is write down, and maybe we're going to use the chat box, but we're going to write down what is alive in the room we're in. Plants, animals, pets. And then we're going to play the symmetry and cephalization game, the social. Let's discuss their symmetry and their, do they have a brain and why? Let's talk about it. I'll see you in class.
Okay. That was interesting and somewhat obnoxious. Let's go back to our slides. So I threw out a bunch of questions there. Which shape might be the one, which shape would lead to, cephalization? Which of these shapes, and and why? And so maybe you can think about that. But why would we get a head end? Why would we get a brain based on one of these two shapes? Okay, so think about that. I've got it written down. Now, cephalization is the idea that there is a brain, right? There's central nervous system somewhere. There's a bunch of neurons. Those are the cells that help you think, in a spot rather than having it diffuse. So jellyfish have neurons we call them kind of a net, a ganglion net, but they have kind of neurons kind of spread out, but there's no central place where there's a lot of thinking going on, okay? That happened, that was important. We started to see sensory organs kind of coming along with cephalization, with the idea of getting a brain. So this was very important, and we're going to write down like what's alive in our classroom or what's alive in our room, and talk about how symmetry and cephalization are important and tied together. Okay. All right, now body cavities. Look back at the phylogeny or make your own, which I think we should do as a challenge. But look back at the phylogeny and you'll see something about body cavities. Now, what is a body cavity? A body cavity is a space inside the body. Now, who cares? It seems kind of stupid. Like, who cares about body cavities and like why, what does it matter? Like, what does it matter about body cavities? So let me get the annotate tool here and show you what I mean. Body cavities. So flatworms do not have a body cavity. Okay, everybody else does. So flatworms, Cnidaria, and Periphera, they do not have body cavities, but everybody beyond that does. Okay, everybody beyond that has body cavities. Why does a body cavity matter? It turns out it was really important. And it's not just like you don't want your internal organs jiggling, although that's kind of cool, but body cavities made way for organ systems. When you have a body cavity, now what happens, all animals after that, you start to see organ systems like your cardiovascular system, like hearts, and you start to see livers, and you start to see spleens and lungs, and really start to see specialization. Once that happens, the animals can get really smart, but they can also get really active, become predators, become very fast prey that are hard to catch. So we're going to see really good diversity after we get these body cavities, and that's why we track it. And there's three different we get body cavities. Now, when we go on to body cavities, this next group here, where it says pseudocoeles and coeloms, that means that they have body cavities, but their body cavities are kind of different. So coelomates, and we can actually put this on a straight line, but pseudocoelomates, there's one group called nematodes. So they have a body cavity, but it's not very complicated. It's kind of a simple one, and it's pseudo meaning like kind of false, like it's kind of a simple body cavity. Everybody else, all of this group, and I'm actually going to put it in purple so you can see it. Everybody else has very complicated body cavity. Everybody else, okay? All of these groups here have nice, a very complicated body cavity, which means they can have nice organ systems. All right, so kidneys, a lot of them have kidneys, not all of them, but some sort of urinary system, some sort of cardiovascular system, some sort of organ systems, body cavities and organ systems really go well together, okay? So I think the next trait we're going to be looking at, I'm just looking down at your lecture notes. The next trait, I'm on page 2, body cavities. Okay, and then we'll be talking about digestive systems. Okay, so before we do that though, I looked back on page 1 and there was something that we missed and I didn't talk about, which is the classification system that we use for classifying animals. And it says domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We'll go over this in lecture, or sorry, in lab. I just wanted you to know. I memorized that. I have a mnemonic from when I was like 10, I don't even know, when I was first learned about classifying organisms. And my classification mnemonic is stupid, but here it is. King Philip came over for green stamps. Kingdom, phylum, there it is. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. When I was growing up, there was no domain, so I don't have a D for you. There was no domain. We didn't have them. So anyway, there's mnemonics for remembering this, and we'll go over it in lab. I just wanted you to know, okay? So let's keep going in our lecture notes. We're on page 2, and it says, we did why do brains matter, page 2, and then we talked about body cavities. Now we're on digestive, and it says the next node, the next branch on our phylogenetic tree has to do with digestive, and here it is. And I'm going to clear the drawings, and we'll look at the slides in a second, but here it is. It's this protostome thing and this deuterostome thing. This could be, you could just put a digestive node on your new drawing that you're going to draw. But protostome and deuterostome were really important in the development of more complex organisms. Proto means before, deutero means, I don't actually know. But what it has to do with, this is really interesting, is when an organism, and I'm going to draw it, you're going to see what an awesome artist I am. When an organism is developing that has true body cavities, when an organism is developing, it will have its digestive system, it will have a front, a first end, a mouth end, and an anal end, an anus. So it has 2 holes, right? The mouth hole and the anus hole. Okay, now, I'm not even lying. It's important, you have to know. If you are mouth first, if the hole that you make as an organism is a mouth, you are called a protostome. So you have a mouth first, okay? If you are anus first, yes, I just used that. If you are anus first, if you produce an anus first, if that's the first hole you produce, you're called a deuterostome. And I would like you to note what you are. Now there's a joke, and I'm not going to say it out loud. Oops, there's a joke. Where'd it go? There we go. There's a joke, a biology joke about humans, okay? Because we are chordates and we are deuterostomes, which means which hole did we generate first, okay? So I'm not going to use the profanity, but there is a joke about humans and which hole is first. And so that's all I'm going to say about this. But anyway, it's very important that from a biological perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, which hole is produced first. So the 2 complicated phyla are echinoderms and chordates. They have very complicated systems, organ systems, whereas the rest of them, mollusks, annelida, and arthropods, it doesn't mean that they're not well adapted or successful. It just means that they're a slightly simpler design for that, for the, or they have a different, I don't want to say simpler, they have a different design. They went to a different route if you're mouth first protos, okay? So I'm going to leave it there. We can talk more about it. I want to look at the slides next. Let's take a look at the slides. Oops. Keep going here. Okay. Mouth or anus first. There is a video if you would like to watch it, but I did explain it. And why is this trait deemed important to include these slides? It's pretty funny, isn't it? So it has to do with the digestive system, and those organisms are very different. That branch led the way to organ systems that are really, really different, or organisms that create organ systems that are really different. Okay, and it's kind of funny too, isn't it? All right, so now The last little part of your lecture notes says, as we walk through the major phyla of invertebrates, have your phylogenetic tree out. That means I would actually like you to draw one yourself instead of using that complicated branch one. For the phyla, can you determine the symmetry for each phylum? Can you determine the symmetry? That's radial, bilateral, or asymmetrical. The tissue, does it have tissues or not? And is it proto or deutero? And I think there was something we're missing. Body cavities or not body cavities, okay? That's kind of what you're looking for. Write down any special features mentioned in the slides on the right, okay? And then I have a list of them: Periphera, Cnidaria, Platyhelminthes, annelids, mollusks, arthropods, nematodes, echinoderms, okay? Chordates are not on there because we will do them next week. And then I have a little table. You can do it this way. Cephalized means I have a brain, but it basically has the same information on there as what's in your notes. So you don't really need to redraw that. I just tend to like tables. I like tables. Okay. And there's a crash course link in your lecture slides if you want to look, because crash course is cool about invertebrates. Okay, we'll be going over details in lab about these, but sponges or Periphera are first. What do you know about them? Maybe you want to write something down. They're asymmetrical. Maybe you missed that. I don't know. But they're asymmetrical. Do they have brains? No. Are they cephalized? No. What kind of symmetry? None. Do they have body tissues? No. None of that. They're filter feeders, but they're really important. They're really important. Next are the Cnidaria or jellyfish. Do they have brains? Are they cephalized? No. What kind of symmetry? Radial. And what else can we learn about them? Do they have tissues? They actually have sort of, yeah, they have tissues actually. Perfect. Okay, now I put in, there's actually a bunch of different types of worms, believe it or not. So annelids, nematodes, and platies, they're all different phyla of worms. They're totally different. In lab, we'll take a look at them. But in here for lecture, we just kind of want to know there's three of them. And it turns out platies are simple. They do not have body cavities. They have tissues, but they do not have body cavities, okay? Nematodes are the next in the line. They have tissues and they have very simple body cavities. They're the pseudo ones, okay? Annelids have it all, okay? They're definitely have tissues. They definitely have body cavities because they have really complicated organ systems. It's weird. And I actually think they're protostomes, mouth first, okay? More in lab. Oh my goodness, we're starting to get into really complicated organisms. The phylum of mollusk. So snails, clams, squid, and octopus. Octopus are very smart. I have a nice video for us to see about an octopus solving problems. There are people in the United States, their job is to create puzzles for octopus that live in the aquariums in the United States. I'm not even kidding, because they need to be, they will basically die of boredom if you don't give them complicated tasks. So they'll put in like their favorite food, which is like crabs and lobsters. They'll put in a crab or a lobster inside a puzzle, inside an opening puzzle that will have very complicated locking mechanisms. And they will figure it out because they're really smart. Give it up for the octopus. Okay, so I'm sorry, what radial symmetry? Not all of them are radial symmetry, right? So a lot of times, but we'll put them in radial. They are protostomes, they have tissues, they have body cavities. Oh my goodness, arthropods, we'll talk about them in lab more. I would argue these are the most successful. They have the most number of species, organisms on the planet, and diverse and amazing. And so even though spiders make me crazy, insects, pollinators, butterflies, they can fly. They dominate our Earth. They're amazing. So they provide for humans. They're really, really cool. They are protostomes, but yes, tissues, yes, brains, yes, they're cephalized, they're bilateral symmetry. Really, really cool organisms, aren't they? Speaking of arthropods and insects, there's a new topic. I don't know if I'll put it, I don't know if we'll have time in lecture. If we do, we're going to watch this, but we used to think these bumblebees, these are called Franklin bumblebees. We thought they were extinct. And it turns out they're not. There's only a few left, but we found out that there's a few left. They have Endangered Species Act status, so we're going to try to save some land. But there's also a debate about all the stakeholders that live on the land in Southern Oregon. So this is southeastern Oregon and Northern California. There's a few of these left, but unfortunately, right, there's humans and development and farming. And so we need to talk about this because it's a kind of a current topic. How do we save species and deal with human rights to, to water and to food and farming and that kind of thing? So interesting. Okay, as we continue, echinoderms are the last group, and sea stars, they're very complicated. They are deuterostomes, so they're the only group, besides chordates that we'll do next week, they're the only group of deuterostomes, so butt first, and they definitely have body cavities, organ systems, cephalized. Ah, interesting. Doesn't seem like they're bilateral symmetry, right? They're radial symmetry. They're weird. They're a weird group. Don't write down radial symmetry because it turns out when they're larvae, when they're little, they actually have bilateral symmetry and they actually have a centralized nervous system. So they're weird. I don't even want you to write it down. Okay. But I do want you to write down echinoderms that they're deuterostomes, okay? Have body cavities. And I think we're done with invertebrates, and we'll get to do all of this again in lab together. Yay. Thank you and have a good week. Let's make sure we're done. Oh, next week, chordates like you and me. Perfect. Everybody have a great week.